Okay, here we go. Hello, good morning, and good afternoon, and maybe even good evening to you. Welcome to another Spider Strategies free monthly education webinar. It is, of course, today is April 29th of 2019, so welcome to the April of 2019 webinar, where we're going to be covering Scoreboard Application Administration Settings, Part 1. My name is Tom Keating. I'm a customer success advocate here at Spider Strategies. I'm honored and pleased to be your presenter today. And just if you want to reach out to me after today's webinar, I can be contacted at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com. Regarding this webinar, for any of you who are new, just some basic logistics about this webinar is that this is being recorded for your future use and reference. All you live attendees are currently muted. I typically apologize for muting you because I always sort of wish that this could be more of a dialogue and an interactive experience rather than sort of a monologue from me and just, presenting you with information, not being able to hear back from you. But we've learned that if we don't mute attendees, we inevitably end up with some sort of background noise pollution of sirens or dogs barking or something. So you are in fact muted at this point in time. I appreciate your patience with that. But if you want to send any questions or communications to me, please, again, feel free to do so directly to me at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com or to our education email at learn@spiderstrategies.com. So today, our agenda for today is a basic introduction to the administrative settings and the capabilities within Scoreboard. We'll be talking about the personal settings. We'll talk about calendars and setting up and employing calendars. And then we'll spend a fair amount of time looking at a variety of different system configuration settings in Scoreboard. Some key questions that I'm going to do my level best to keep in mind and address for you while we talk about the various administrative settings and the controls in Scoreboard is, basically, what are they, where are they, why would you use it or them, and how will a setting impact Scoreboard? Let's start with one of those basic questions is, where are the administrative settings accessed within Scoreboard? So I'm showing you a screen capture of the Scoreboard homepage. If you direct your attention to the lower left-hand corner, I've got in a red box around the little gear icon. So to clicking the gear icon opens up where the home navigation pane is presently presented. If you click on that gear icon, that home pane is replaced with the settings navigation pane and the various sections available to you under settings. I will point out here that what you're viewing right now is a power users or administrative power users view of that settings navigation pane. And that leads me to a really kind of a key concept that I want to make sure everyone understands is that, system permissions define what users can see and do in Scoreboard, and that different users will see different views of that settings navigation pane in Scoreboard, of course, depending on and based on their appointed permissions. So to just follow that thought a little bit further, if we were to take a look at what a viewer user has for permissions within Scoreboard, you'll see that they have a fairly limited list of permissions, and that when they are logged in to Scoreboard and click on that settings icon in the lower left corner, their view of the settings navigation pane is fairly limited. It only gives them access to their personal section where they can address account information, alert preferences, and broadcast alerts. Similarly, a communication or updater user within Scoreboard, you see here that they, of course, have more permissions. They have about 3 times as many permissions as a viewer user does within Scoreboard. However, when they, again, access the settings area or the settings navigation pane within Scoreboard, they, again, are limited to just their personal settings. Similarly, account info, alert preferences, and broadcast alert. But an admin or power user within Scoreboard, of course, has extensive permissions assigned to them and defined for them. And when an administrative or power user logs into Scoreboard and they access the settings area or navigation pane of Scoreboard, they again have that far more extensive, deeper access to different sections of administrative settings within Scoreboard. Today, just so you know, I will be logged in for the rest of our time together logged in as a power user with the full administrative permissions within Scoreboard. And again, just a quick reminder of what we're going to be covering today, where we will, of course, be covering the settings and capabilities within that personal settings that all users can address. And then we'll move on to the more administrative power user capabilities of creating and using calendars, as well as a myriad collection of different system configuration settings available to, again, a power user, administrative power user in Scoreboard. And again, physically, visually, the areas that we'll be working with within that settings navigation pane are the personal section, the setup section where you have access to calendars, and then just a little bit further down, the configuration section, where again, we've got an extensive list of application administration settings that we'll be discussing. All right, so with that lead in or setup covered, let's actually jump into Scoreboard. I, of course, have already logged into Scoreboard, as I said earlier, as a power user with full administrative capabilities. I've landed at my home page, and what I'll do is go to that lower left corner and the settings icon, the kind of gear icon, and I'll click settings to open up the settings pane. And we'll start at the top of our settings navigation pane and the personal area. So again, all users of Scoreboard will have access to this personal section of settings. And of course, the account information is fairly straightforward. It will present you with your system-defined username. If someone does not have direct control over that, that is an administrative capability. But a given user can, of course, define their own preferred email address, their own preferred first, middle, and last name, and of course, they have complete control over their own personal password. So just as a simple example here, if I were to say, I'd like to have my middle initial in here included in my username, I can add the middle initial of F. And once I've made a change like that, in the lower right-hand corner, I can click Save, and I have thus just changed my own, account information profile settings. Moving down the list to Alert Preferences, this is where you have access to your alert subscriptions that you, as a user of Scoreboard, are able to voluntarily subscribe to. In terms of alerts that can come to you, you are subscribing to these, again, voluntarily. If we start at the very top, a key setting here under Alert Preferences is under Email Preferences. Here is where you have the opportunity to define whether you want an email notification to be sent to you when an alert is triggered within Scoreboard. You don't have to have alerts come your way via email, but if you want to be emailed simultaneous to the Scoreboard system creating and triggering an alert, you can say that it should happen immediately, maybe just every night, give you kind of a batch dump of emails that come out of Scoreboard, or every week on a particular day that you would select. So in my case, I do want to be immediately alerted via email when alerts are triggered by Scoreboard. You can see that at the present time, I have one and only one alert subscription around the product revenue KPI, and I'd actually like at this point to add a couple more alert subscriptions. So I'll move to the upper right and click the Add button to create a new subscription. And you see that you can create alert subscriptions around normalized score changes, KPI value changes, and whether notes are added. And we'll create one instance of each of these. So if I click on the score change, I'm presented, of course, with a nice tree structure presentation of my underlying, in this case, the mobile world or the financial or what have you, different organizations and the scorecards therein. And I'll just jump over. Let's go to actually the customer support and say that I'd like to be alerted around help desk issues. So if I find that this calls handled achieves an alert score, I'm moving down to the bottom, an alert score that is below or equal to the value of 5, I would like to be alerted. And again, in terms of when that alert is triggered, can be below or equal to, above or equal to, or directly equal to a particular score that you provide or define here. And again, it can be for this particular scorecard item, or if you're working with an objective level, it can be triggered by KPIs under an objective as well. In this case, we're of course focusing directly on a KPI, so I'll leave it as set to 5, and I'll click Add. So I've subscribed, as you can see, of course, the calls handled. It reflects for me the rule that I set up, that if the score change is below or equal to 5, please alert me, and that thing is ready to go for me. I'll click Add to add another alert to address a KPI value change. In this case, again, we'll just navigate into the customer support organization. Again, we'll just continue to focus on help desk calls. And let's say that we want to be alerted if the percent calls answered is, again, it could be above, it could be below, what have you. If it's below, let's say 10%, I want to be alerted if the percentage of calls answered falls below 10%, and I'll click add to add that as another alert. One more alert that we'll create or subscribe to is notes added. Again, hopefully you're familiar with the concept of notes and the collaboration and communication available within Scoreboard for people to talk, if you will, talk to each other via notes and replies. And I could say in this case, if someone were to create a note around the average abandonment rate, KPI, I want to be alerted that a note has come into existence so that I can go and review it, reflect on it, respond to it, what have you. And again, it will just indicate here that you have added a note. Please be aware that after you have set up a subscription to an alert, you can edit that subscription. Maybe I want to go to the percent calls answered and say, 10% may be a little low. Let's actually say that I'd like to know if the percent of calls answered falls below 20%. So I can obviously easily make an edit to that. And of course, you've got the garbage can to be able to delete any of these alert subscriptions should in the future you decide you don't any longer want to be alerted about that type of change within Scoreboard. So that is your alert preferences area. Let's move down the navigation pane here for settings and just talk about broadcast alerts. So I'll click on broadcast alerts. This is fairly straightforward, and it says right in blue what this will do for you. It gives you the opportunity to send a message, to users, and you can just say your message goes here to provide, whatever kind of message you want to push out. And then over to the right, you have the opportunity to select the recipient. Now, of course, you could push a message out to everyone, kind of a broadcast blast alert, or you can navigate down and find particular named users, whatever is appropriate for this broadcast alert that, again, you're going to be leveraging the Scoreboard system to push a communication out to users within Scoreboard. I'll go ahead and just set this one up to everyone so everyone will get my message goes here. And then lastly, before I click away and send that broadcast alert, in the lower left corner, there's a send notification and a pop-up check. This allows you that if someone is already logged into Scoreboard, when you push the send broadcast alert message, it will pop up for them. They don't have to log out and then log back in and have the alert reflected for them on their home page. I'll just go ahead and click send broadcast alert to push that alert out. A very subtle change has occurred in the upper left corner next to my home button, where the number of alerts went from 2 to 3. And if I navigate now out to the home page, I see that, of course, I sent it out to everyone. I was the author of the alert, but I, of course, then in turn received that alert. So that broadcast alert has now been, it's on my home page, and it would be on every other Scoreboard user's home page as well. And they can, look at it, reflect on it, and respond to it if appropriate. So that takes care of, within the settings area, all of the capabilities that every user will have access to, their own personal account information, their own chosen alert preferences and subscriptions, and the opportunity to provide or send out a broadcast alert. Let's continue on here by moving down into the setup section where we'll address calendars. And again, at this point, I'm moving away from the capabilities that all users have, where now these are, again, power user administrative settings capabilities from this point forward here on our session together today. So under calendars, you see that over towards the right, the middle right, we've got 3 existing calendars. There's a monthly calendar that has been set up and established. There's a yearly calendar, and there's a custom yearly fiscal calendar that have all already been set up here within Scoreboard. And if I click on monthly, over on the farther right, there's a listing of all the months that have been established and set up within Scoreboard and are, of course, available for navigation within Scoreboard. So before we move ahead to creating a new calendar, just want to reflect where these calendars are presented within the Scoreboard application. So I'll click on Scorecards over on the left to open up the Scorecard section of Scoreboard. And again, hopefully you're already familiar with this within Scoreboard, that towards the upper right, there is a calendar period selector opportunity where you can change, the periodicity with which you view, in this case, your scorecards, This also, of course, lives within, the charts and reports area. It exists within the briefings area, and also within the dashboards area of QuickScore. So this calendar period selector is pretty omnipresent within Scoreboard. And what the calendars define are the choices that you have within that calendar period selector. So you see here that I have 3 different calendars of monthly, yearly, and custom yearly fiscal calendar, which is exactly what we saw back in the calendars setting interface. So I'll jump back into the administrative settings area and again return to calendars. And what we want to show you now here is how to create a new calendar. So under the calendars list here, there's an add calendar button towards the upper right. We'll click on add calendar. And when you're adding a calendar, you have choices of 2 different types. It's either standard or custom. Standard allows you to take advantage of the Gregorian calendars and or a couple of selective U.S. government fiscal calendars that have been built into the system. The custom calendar requires that you set this calendar up by yourself, give it a name, and appropriately define the periods that should exist within that calendar. We'll do an example of each of those 2 here together. We'll start with a standard calendar, and if I click on the Choose Calendar dropdown, it shows me what calendars are available, again, out of the box within Scoreboard to leverage. At this point, we will create a quarterly, if you will, Gregorian calendar. When you create a new calendar, you can set up that you want to prevent KPI values updates after a certain quantity of days at the end of a calendar period, and or prevent note changes after a certain number of days, again, after the end of this calendar period that you're going to define. I will leave those blank at this point in time, and I'll click Add. So immediately, I now have created a quarterly calendar, which is listed at the bottom of the calendars, and I can see over on the right that what it has done is basically started here in the current year of 2019 and has created 4 different quarters for 2019 as well as 2 more quarters for 2020. Now, I might want to extend that calendar looking ahead down the road where I know I'll be using Scoreboard for years to come, and I'd like to extend these quarterly selections out beyond just the second quarter of 2020. To do so, you can click the Extend Calendar button in the upper right corner and very quickly and easily select, a year in the future. Maybe I'll jump all the way ahead to 2023 and say I'd like this quarterly calendar to be extended all the way through April of 2023 and click Extend. And that has immediately occurred. And again, Scoreboard is taking advantage of its, underlying, if you will, knowledge of the nature of just standard Gregorian calendars and has extended out that quarterly calendar for me all the way through the second quarter of 2023. In terms of the presentation of these different calendars, when you're back in, let's say, scorecards or looking at dashboards or what have you, the order in which these calendars are presented here will define how they're presented, again, within the different sections of Scoreboard. So if I'd like quarterly to be presented under monthly, but prior to yearly, when someone is working with the calendar period selector, I simply drag and drop quarterly and lay it in where I want it to go. So at this point, if I jump back out to the scorecards section of Scoreboard and take a look at my calendar period selector dropdown, you now see that I have monthly and quarterly. Oh, I don't know why I have 2. For some reason, I've got 2 quarterlies. I'm not sure what's going on there, but quarterly is in here. Maybe it's still just recalculating. It's still working. But the calendar of quarterly now exists for me and is available for me to select and work with in terms of, navigation and review of the information in Scoreboard. Okay, another thing about calendars that we want to talk about is custom calendars. So you see that I've got a custom yearly fiscal calendar already created and established. Let's say that I now want, I don't know why I got 2 quarterlies here. That's interesting. There's 2, it doubled up on me. So with that said, let's show you how easy it is to remove a calendar. In the upper right corner, next to the quarterly calendar name at the top, there's a delete button. So I can go ahead and delete that 1 quarterly calendar that exists, and now the second one, now I'm just down to 1 quarterly calendar. Okay, moving ahead to the custom calendar that I want to address next. Again, if I click the Add Calendar button here, let's say that, well, before I go here, let's just reflect that we've got a custom yearly fiscal calendar, and you see that in our world, here at the Mobile World organization, our fiscal year goes from October 1 through September 30. So let's imagine that I now want some fiscal quarters available to me again for reporting and for data visualization purposes. I again can click the Add Calendar button. In this case, we'll select Custom next to Calendar Type, and we'll call this Fiscal Quarters, and click Add. So I have a calendar called Fiscal Quarters. Again, I can drag and drop it, position it wherever I want it to be. But if I look out to the right here for fiscal quarters, there are no quarters yet defined. There's a calendar, but it doesn't know yet about what my quarters are. What are my, personal or custom fiscal quarters? So out towards the right, I'll click Add Period to add a new period, and we'll call this Fiscal Q1. And Fiscal Q1, as we talked about, starts October. Just navigate here, October, and we'll start this in the year 2018. So October 1st, 2018 is the beginning of our 2019 fiscal year, and the first quarter goes from October 1st through, in this case, we'll just navigate to December of 2018 and the last day of December. So I've selected October 1st as the beginning, December 31st as the end of fiscal Q1, and I click Add Period. And now I've got that fiscal Q1 defined. To create another fiscal quarter, again, click Add Period. We'll call this Fiscal Q2. And as you might imagine, we'll go from January 1st of 2019 through March 31st of 2019 for that second fiscal quarter, and click Add Period. So hopefully at this point you get the idea of how custom calendars are created and the distinct groups, or if you will, calendars within that overall calendar, the different periods within that calendar are defined. So that's the setup of calendars within Scoreboard. Let's move ahead in our appointed daily agenda today to move down to the configuration area or section of our settings pane and open up the broad and extensive list of application administration settings available to you, again, as a power user or an administrator of Scoreboard. And you can see here that this, again, application administration has a lot of different settings. I will do my level best here over the next half hour or so to cover all of these with you. We'll start in the first, if you will, category or area here, which is called email notification. I should point out that may be a little misleading, because what this really addresses is alert notification. We talked earlier about how someone can, of course, choose under the alert preferences to have alerts emailed to them when they are generated by Scoreboard. So that can happen, but it's a given user's choice as to whether they are actually emailed or not. So what we're talking about here in this first area is really alert notification that will be, again, generated by the system and be pushed out by the system within Scoreboard. But if someone wants emails, they, of course, can do that in their alert preferences. Okay, so the first setting here is red KPIs without tasks. Hopefully the concept of the system alerting you or alerting everyone when a KPI turns red is fairly straightforward. You know, if a KPI becomes red, someone should know, and it will be the owner and the updater that are informed of that KPI becoming red. But in this case, the question is, does a KPI have a task that it is related to? So let me just cover that idea very quickly here. Under initiatives in the far left, if I open up the initiatives section of Scoreboard and navigate and find a task. So under our build SEO capability initiative, there's a task to provide a status update to the board. And you'll note down towards the lower right that there is a related item of a KPI called network availability. Network availability is a KPI that someone has said this, should be related to that status update to the board task. And so what we'll do is just say, well, if the network availability becomes red, should an alert be generated by the system? Now, in this case, if that task has been set up with an association to the KPI, then an email or an alert will not be generated. So let me just return here back to that application administration. I've got this set to no, right? So if something turns red, if it has a task, it will generate an alert. If it doesn't have a task, then it will not generate an alert. Okay, moving down here, the note replied to. This is pretty straightforward. You're hopefully familiar with the idea of notes within Scoreboard. And the simple question here is if someone replies to an existing note, you've got the opportunity, of course, to reply to a note. If someone replies to it, should the author of the original note be informed? And the settings here are basically yes or no. So it's the author of the original note that would receive an alert saying, hey, somebody replied to your note, and that person can then choose to go forth and investigate the reply, and then again in turn maybe reply back. The next setting here is red KPIs upon turning red. This is similar to the red KPIs without task, but it doesn't have the implication of a task associated with it. So red KPIs upon turning red, again, the choice is either yes or no. If a KPI becomes red, should the owner and the updater of that KPI be immediately alerted by the Scoreboard system? Yes or no? KPI update reminders. This is an extremely helpful setting here within the administrative console. This gives an administrator the opportunity to set system-wide the Scoreboard system set up with notifications that should go out to all owners and updaters of KPIs a given number of days before the end of a given time period. So you may want to alert people in advance that a KPI that they own or update needs to be updated soon. So let's say that we want to send out an alert 3 days before the end of the period. And also, if you'd like, you can set multiple time periods here. So you can say that not only 3 days before the end of a time period, the owner or updater of a KPI should be informed or alerted, but also 1 day after the end of that time period. So they, again, get an alert to effectively kick them and say, did you go and update that alert that you're responsible for as an updater? And again, take note here that you can set up any number of days before or days after that alert should be pushed out, again, to the owners and the updaters of KPIs. The last one here under alert or email notifications is an interesting one. It's about owners of parents of linked items when the underlying source is modified. It's a very long, lot of words there. Let me just try and clarify what we're talking about here. So in the scorecards area of Scoreboard, I'll go ahead and save those changes that I made. In the scorecards area, we've got in our Mobile World Inc. organization, we have kind of a standard, or classic balanced scorecard set up here with our 4 perspectives. Under financial, we have this increased revenue objective. And if you look under the increased revenue objective here, you see that product revenue, training revenue, and book revenue are KPIs that all, of course, roll up to increase revenue. Now, these are linked KPIs. Product revenue, you see the little chain or link icon to the left of product revenue, and it actually ties out to a product revenue KPI that lives in our financial area or scorecard within the Mobile World, overall larger Mobile World organization. So if I click on product revenue and click on the I for info button in the upper right hand corner, it'll show me that product revenue, that link to product revenue, is tied to the source KPI of product revenue. And if I click on that product revenue, it'll open up the original, if you will, or source product revenue. Now, the question here is, if someone makes a change, if someone has edit capabilities and they come into the original product revenue and go in and edit it and maybe do something simple like changing the red flag value from 450,000 to 440,000. So if a change like that is made, and I'll go ahead and save it and apply it. So the underlying original product revenue has now been fundamentally changed. The question is, with this setting that I'll get back to, is should someone who is the owner of the objective to increase revenue, so you'll see here that increase revenue, again, is an objective that, again, it ties via a link to product revenue, and I'll click edit on increased revenue, and you see that I am the owner of that increased revenue objective. And the setting that we're getting back to is, should I be informed? Should I be alerted that somebody went in and made that fundamental change to the original product revenue KPI that this product revenue links to? So it's a rather a circuitous explanation there, but hopefully that does make sense to you. So the question is, should I, as the owner of that objective, be notified or not about a change like that change to product revenue? So I could say, yes, please let me know about that. That's important, for me to know. Okay, let's move ahead here into the next area or section of our application administration settings. We'll talk about scoring now. The first one is a very straightforward and simple setting. Should normalized scores, the 0 to 10 normalized scores within Scoreboard, should they be presented or not? And this comes down to, it's all over the place, whether it be in scorecards or in dashboards or wherever you have the opportunity to present the normalized score. So if I just look at this mobile world scorecard, we see that across all of the various perspectives and objectives and measures that we are doing 7.3. That's our score. And it's immediately visible to me. It's, of course, presented on the speedometer. And what I could do is say, for whatever reason, I don't want to see that score. I still want it to be scored. I still need it to be colored, but I don't want to see that normalized score. So I could go in here to the scores visible and make it no, and then click save. And then if I navigate back out to that exact same scorecard, and again, look at the mobile world scorecard, it's still green. I know that behind the scenes, it's still scored at 7.2, but that 7.2 score is not being visually presented to me here on my, speedometer. Okay, I'll go back here into the application administration area. I'm going to turn the scores back on to yes, because I do like seeing those scores. The next setting here, ignore gray scorecard items for color roll-up. This is it's a subtle one, but it's important to understand. I'll navigate again back out to the scorecards area, and I will save that subtle change that I just made. So within, again, the scorecards area, I've got this financial perspective and increase revenue. You'll see here that increased revenue is reflecting a score of 10, and it's coming from the underlying scores for product revenue, training revenue, book revenue, and total revenue. But if you look down towards the right, kind of middle right over here, you'll see that book revenue and total revenue do not yet have scores for the period of March 2019. Yet, increased revenue still is being scored. And that's important because you may want to roll up the weighted averages of the scores that you have, up in this case to the objective level, even though everything has not yet been filled in. Or there's another approach to this, is to say, don't score increased revenue until all the contributing measures have been scored and are providing their contribution to the overall objective of increased revenue. So the application setting here, the application administration setting of ignore gray scorecard items for color roll-up is really important. At this point, it is set to yes, which is how, the system that the way it's set up right now, it's rolling up what it has in terms of already scored for the KPIs that have been provided actual information and thus, of course, scored. They are being rolled up. If I were to change this to no, and click save, and go back out to that same scorecard here, again under financial, again increase revenue. Okay, let's give this a second. So the data, it's still doing a little recalculate. I don't know if you can see here along the top in blue, the data here hasn't yet been recalculated. It's working on it, and my aspiration here is to show you the change after making that administration setting to not ignore the grays. So we'll just do a couple of quick refreshes here and hope that it catches up here for me. Okay, that's taken a little bit longer than I wanted it to, but we'll come back to that here in just a second. I'll jump back into the application administration area and just forge on. Again, we'll come back to reviewing the impact of the ignore gray scorecard items. The next setting down here, by default, missing values. This setting right here defines what is provided by default when someone sets up a KPI and if they want to set it up as a calculated KPI and how that KPI should treat missing values. And again, the thing about this is you can, as an administrator, select a default setting, but when someone is creating a KPI anew, they will be able to, if you will, override the default setting that has been chosen here. So this is just for an system administrator, again, to make kind of an executive decision on how missing values should be treated by default. But again, someone setting up a KPI has the capability to override those settings. And again, let me just show you real quickly where that comes into play. And I'm hoping here that I can go back out to increase revenue. It still isn't reflecting that. Okay. But in here, if I wanted to create a new measure, let's just jump out here to a different scorecard. I'll go into financial. And let's say that here I just want to create a new scorecard item that's going to be a KPI. And this pertains, again, I'm going to scroll down to the actual value here in the series area. And again, we're talking about what should occur with missing values, the setting of missing values. If I set up the actual value to be calculated, you'll see that right here, what will it do in terms of handling missing values, right? And again, based on what we saw in the administrative setting, it was treat any missing values, makes the entire equation blank. I could have, as the administrator, chosen treat missing values as 0 or treat them as NA. But so that's administrative setting basically controls what is here and available by default. But again, the person setting up the KPI can voluntarily choose a different way to treat missing values. So that takes care of that. Let's just cancel out of there. And again, I'll jump back into the administrative settings area. Okay, so we're still talking about scores here. To show the NA option, this allows someone when they are updating a KPI to potentially opt out of providing information for a given time period. So where this show NA option, again, it's either yes or no. Where this comes into play, again, is if I return out to the scorecards area and go and pick, any particular KPI, let's say product revenue, and if I click edit to provide it with a value, an amended value for, in this case, March of 2019, because I have that administrative setting of show NA set as yes, to the left, I've got this, I always call it the no smoking circle. It's a circle with a line through it. And if that is available, someone for a given time period can effectively opt out of providing actual values for that KPI for that particular time period. And again, it's that administrative setting of should this NA be there or not, which empowers its presence. So if I cancel here and return again to the application administration area and go to that show NA option and just change it to be no and click save, and then return back out to my scorecards and find again that same product revenue KPI, and once again click edit, you'll see that there is now no circle with a line through it out to the left of March 2019. So I don't have the opportunity to say, I don't have any, I've got non-applicable information for this month. I just really don't want to provide information right now. You can't do that. You're, if you will, required to provide information for that time period in terms of actual performance or red or gold values. So that is that setting. Let me just do a quick here, jump back into financial, or back up to mobile world. Let's see if we can reflect under financial. There we go. Okay, so you'll recall earlier that the idea of should gray be ignored, and we changed it. So you'll see now that increased revenue, as much as the fact that I have information for the product revenue KPI, I've got a score for the training revenue KPI, but now increased revenue is not scored. It is sitting there waiting for book revenue and total revenue to be scored, and only then will increase revenue as the objective acquire a score. It's waiting for all of the contributing, if you will, children to be scored before increased revenue is scored. And that, again, that's going back a couple of settings here, but I wanted to just make sure that we covered that, is that was the ignore gray scorecard items for color rollup. So I am going to go ahead and put that back to yes, because I do want things like that objective to be scored to whatever extent possible, even if all of the underlying feeder or children measures or KPIs don't yet have scores. And again, whoops, I'll click save in the lower right corner to save that. Okay, so the NA option is where we left off. Non-KPI colors, this is where you just have the opportunity to define how things like objectives, perspectives, scorecards, how they are colored. And you've got several different choices here. It can be 2 color, 3 color, 4 blue, 4 orange, or 4 color scored in the middle. And again, the idea is that KPIs themselves are going to be colored based on the scoring type that was assigned to a KPI. But when you get to the objective, perspective, and scorecard levels, and theme and scorecard levels, there are different choices in terms of, if you will, the color palette that is employed to visually present the scores that have been rolled up to those levels. So you have choices there. By far the most commonly used, and the default is the 3 color red, yellow, green coloring. Okay. The next one here, enable forward effect scoring, is something I'm going to pass over today. It's very subtle. It's hardly ever used. It really only comes into play when someone has set up a KPI that is only updated very infrequently, let's say on a yearly basis, but someone chooses within the scorecards area to view that particular KPI at, let's say, a monthly level. And the question is, what should the software do? Should it carry across the last yearly value into the months for a new year for which you really have not yet provided information? And this is almost always just left at no. And again, it will take a lot of time to get too deep into that one. And then last here under scoring is, divide by 0 equals 0. And your 2 choices here are either yes or no. If you have set up a KPI with a calculation that is a division type calculation, and if for a given time period you end up with a 0 as the denominator, the question is, how should Scoreboard handle that in terms of the score? And your choices again are either make it 0, yes, or make it no, not 0. If you do select no, then it turns around and reflects what it should do up here in the by default missing values, because it's going to treat it as a missing value. It's, if you've got a 0 as a denominator, your choices are either treat it as a numeric, normalized score of 0, or refer back to how the missing values should be treated. And it can be 0, NA, blank, or make the whole equation blank. Okay, forging ahead here. We're doing okay here for time. Let's just move ahead into the general settings area. This default calendar period defines what someone experiences when they first log in to Scoreboard. What time period should be presented to them right off the bat? And that comes into play, for instance, on the home page. When you log in to Scoreboard, it acknowledges who you are and it acknowledges today's date, and then it says, well, what should I present to somebody on the home page, as well as within, for instance, the scorecard section. If I jump into scorecards, it immediately and automatically assumes that I want to see March of 2019. And it's doing that because it acknowledges that today is April. It's late April of 2019. April is not yet complete. March of 2019 is, so therefore it's going to, by default, show me information about March of 2019. I, of course, can navigate anywhere I want to go forward and backwards in time, but the question is, by default, what does it show me in terms of what time period and information that is immediately shown to me when I first log in, okay? And that is, again, the default calendar period setting. Next setting down, this one's pretty intuitive with regard to speedometers and gauges. Should red always be on the left, or in certain instances, can red be on the right? So let's imagine that you've got, a customer churn type KPI, measure, and, a high number is bad. You still want the larger numbers on the speedometer to be reflected on the right, but of course, then you want red to be over on the right. So in this case, you can force Scoreboard to always show red on the left, although in many cases, it may not be appropriate. So it's just your choice, whether it's a yes or no setting, should red always be on the left or not. The next setting down, display IDs. This comes into play when someone is viewing information about scorecard elements. Let's say that I go in here and take a look at, the financial perspective, and I want to know a little bit more information about that financial perspective. The question here with regard to displaying IDs is, should I see that element's unique underlying scoreboard system ID? And this comes into play, again, most predominantly within the information screen, like I'm showing you here. It also can become a column element of a report. Sometimes people want to create reports and reflect not only the name of scorecard elements, but also the unique system ID so that they can reference that, maybe if they're going to create another calculation or a calculated KPI off of already existing KPIs, you of course need to reflect or point to those existing KPIs with their system ID, and that gives you the opportunity to view them. Back into the administration section here. Let's see, where were we? Display IDs. Enforce. Okay, the next 5 settings all pertain to, login authentication and really more particularly passwords. So the next, again, 5 settings here are all about passwords. Should a strong passwords be enforced, requiring people, to set up their passwords with both letters and numbers, or can they just set up whatever their own password is? They could just put a single letter if they want, if that's really what they want their password to be. The next one is changes, before a password can be reused. So a lot of times people want to harken back to their old familiar password that they'll never forget. But maybe, in terms of security, may be wise to force them to use other passwords a given number of times before they can go back to that old familiar password. So you can set how many, times someone has to change before they can go back to the old familiar one. Next setting, very straightforward and obvious. How often should users be forced to change their passwords? Again, in units of days. Next one down here, number of invalid login attempts allowed. How many times can someone try to log in unsuccessfully before they basically just get locked out? And then we'll need to address that either via the administrator or set up, their own change to their password via email. Okay, and this allow password reset via email is the last, password-based setting here. I just want to reflect on this one with you very quickly. So I'll change it to yes. And then to show you the impact of setting it to yes, I will log out of Scoreboard and I'll log back in to Scoreboard. But note, as I'm doing so, along the bottom, you see this lost your password question. It's kind of subtle, it's kind of gray, but this is there because I just set that administrative setting to yes for allow password reset via email. So that is what that setting pertains to. I'll jump back into that application administration area. Okay. Next, moving down the list, allow password via email. Red KPIs indicator for scores less than something. And this red KPIs indicator, the most common question is, what is that? Where is it shown? What are you talking about here? The idea of setting it, below 3.34 is fairly straightforward. Again, it aligns with our red, yellow, green normalized scoring, with the goal and red flag scoring type. But if I go out to scorecards here, and again, we'll just pick on, mobile world at this case, note that along the top under the mobile world scorecard, we've got the overview tab that we've been viewing here all along, but there's also a KPIs tab, and you'll see that in the KPIs tab, there is a red circle with an exclamation point. That is there because somewhere within the month of March of 2019, there are some values that are under the score of 3.34. So that, again, the red circle with an exclamation point, its existence is basically reflecting that, again, somewhere for this time period, something has fallen under the score of 3.34. So it's the threshold for when that circle should appear is what that setting, that application administration setting is all about. The next setting down here, require a note when updating KPIs that have a score less than. This, again, is fairly straightforward. If someone is an updater of a KPI, they go to put in an actual value, which is going to translate to a normalized score less than, let's say, 5, then they are going to be required to provide a note to explain some information about that actual performance number. The next setting down, prevent scorecard item changes a given number of days after archive date. Getting into archives would probably take more time than we have right now, But elements of scorecards can be set up with archive dates where they basically should stop being tracked and they should stop being presented going forward, but they still remain, of course, within the underlying database repository for historical reflection. The question here is, if something has been archived, how many days after that archive date should someone be physically able to go in and maybe make a minor amendment or a change to the values that have been, stored for that scorecard element? And you can choose whatever is appropriate there for however many days after. The next one here with regard to sending the support emails, this pertains to where support emails go if someone from the home page, I won't say that, if someone on the home page goes to the lower right-hand corner and uses the Scoreboard Support Contact Us button, they, of course, get the opportunity to send an email. The question on the administrative setting is, where does this go? And of course, within that app admin area, you can define whatever should be the destination of that support email in our case. And again, the default is our own Spider Strategies help desk at spiderstrategies.com. Forging ahead here, the year-to-date calendar. If you're going to take advantage of the year-to-date function and calculation capability within Scoreboard, the humble or simple question here is, which year calendar should be employed for those year-to-date calculations? And in our case, we've got, a Gregorian standard yearly calendar. We also have our custom yearly fiscal calendar. So when you're setting this up, which of those two should be employed to handle or take care of year-to-date calculations within Scoreboard? And then last here under this particular section is the show welcome message. That again pertains to the home page. It's presently set to yes. So if I go to the home page, up along the top, there is this welcome message area, and the administrative setting is basically, should this be shown or not? And in this case, of course, it's set up to yes, so I do see the welcome message and the opportunity for the video in it and whatever messaging the administrator might want to provide. Okay, moving ahead here. We're getting close. Authentication settings. Again, there are 3 different types of authentication that you can take advantage of here to set up how people are logged in, to Scoreboard. It can either be the proprietary internal Scoreboard as the owner and the holder of the username and password listing, or you can point to an LDAP resource. If you do select LDAP, then of course you need to take the time to define the LDAP server setup appropriately, what URL, base, admin, DN, and so forth are appropriate so that Scoreboard can take advantage of all of the authentication capabilities inherent within that LDAP server. The other choice here is OpenID Connect. Again, similarly, if you choose OpenID Connect, it's required to provide some authorization endpoint, token endpoint, user information endpoint, and so on. So additional information, of course, needs to be provided to Scoreboard so that it can take advantage of all the authentication capabilities via, in this case, OpenID or LDAP. Again, Scoreboard is the most commonly employed. Again, that just allows the Scoreboard itself to be the owner of all of the user IDs and passwords for authentication and login. Moving towards the upper right, this last section, I think we can get through this fairly quickly. It's pretty straightforward across the board in terms of data format as presented within Scoreboard. The first is, of course, numeric precision. How many decimal places do you want to see presented, within Scoreboard as you're looking at all your various data elements throughout Scoreboard? How many decimals? Next one down, currency. Obviously, if you're going to be working with currency values, you get the opportunity down a little further to select what currency you're going to employ. And then here, of course, it's just how many decimal precision do you want to see associated with your currency selection. The next setting here about display format for usernames is, when usernames are presented within Scoreboard, maybe within a report or looking at a history, kind of a log of activity, how should a given user's name be presented? So you get to make the choice here of how the various users should be shown in those reports or logs. If you want to apply additional titles, formalize things a little bit with your Mr. or your Mrs. or your doctor or what have you, and you want to make different titles available for use within Scoreboard, you can define them here. They're just basically pipe delimited. Similarly, KPI Units, this is the same kind of idea where you can provide custom units that should then be available when someone, again, is setting up a KPI. So I will pause just a second on this one just to reflect that we presently have hours, days, and minutes set up. So the question here is, well, where does that apply? How would I take advantage of these units? It all comes down to when you are creating, we'll go ahead and save that. When you're creating KPIs originally, if I were to go, again, I'll just jump out here to a different organization and make this a little bit faster. And if I go to create a new scorecard item and we set it up as a KPI, when you're creating a KPI, there's a data type drop down towards the middle right. And if you select number, then below it, there's a units property or selection. And if I click on units, there are the values that we just saw back in the administration area of hours, days, and minutes. So of course, if you wanted to extend this to be something like customers or I don't know, any other numeric unit that you want to employ when setting up a KPI, you simply define, I won't save that. You simply define the existence of that unit back again within the application administration area right in here under the KPI units. Tags are something that can be associated with scoreboards or scorecards, within Scoreboard. The idea behind a tag is to make it easier to find that scorecard element within Scoreboard. If you've got lots of different scoreboards in here sometimes, or scorecards in here, sometimes it can be difficult to find something. If you provide a tag, then that tag can be leveraged within our search capabilities to find what you're looking for. And again, you can just provide any number of pipe delimited or pipe separated tags that someone then again can pull from a list when they're setting up a new scorecard. And lastly, the default currency unit, again, very straightforward here. Good old USD, American greenback dollars, or euros, or the UK pounds are what are presently exist in my list. But again, if I click choose available currencies, you see that we have an extensive list within Scoreboard of a lot of different world currencies. Let's say I want to add the Czech Republic koruna, whatever that is, and I'll click update to update my list. And now if I look at the listing of currencies available to me, I of course have that Czech Republic koruna available. So that is the last of the settings here in the administration area. We are very close to the top of our appointed hour, and I think that takes care of everything that we've talked about covering today. Allow me just to bring up again my presentation deck and just reflect again with you our aspired agenda today, which was to discuss the personal settings, to talk about the setup and creation of calendars, and then all of those myriad system configuration settings that I did my best to get through fairly quickly with you. Before we let you go, let me just ask you to, again, please join us in May for our next webinar. We aspire in May to continue with the discussion of the Scoreboard application administration beyond what we were able to cover today. And I hope you can join us. Before, again, we send you off on your merry way, let me again thank you for attending this webinar. I hope it was helpful to you. Again, please feel free to contact me personally anytime at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com, or, of course, reach out to us via our education email at learn@spiderstrategies.com. Thank you again for your time, and have a great day.